This is a Momentum Media production.
The SMSF Adviser Show. Your expert insights into the biggest themes shaping the SMSF advice industry.
Hi everyone, I'm Miranda Brownlee and welcome to this special 50th episode of the SMSF Adviser Show. I'm joined by my co-host Aaron Dunn. How are you, Aaron?
Very good, Miranda. Yourself?
I'm good, thanks.
Frantic in the lead up to Christmas?
Yes, it's definitely been a busy one this year, as I'm sure everyone else is busy as well. But yes, today we're going to be looking at some of the top stories or top developments that happened over the year, and we're also going to be celebrating our 50th podcast episode.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think part of what we wanted to do is not only reflect in terms of an end-of-year wrap. We know there's been a whole range of technical issues, and we'll touch on many of those, but they then naturally get reflected in the topics that we speak about on our SMSF Adviser Show and also in the articles that you see throughout the year, Miranda. So it's about giving people some insights as to what was kind of driving the SMSF landscape throughout the 2022 year. And as you said, it's great that we've got to 50 episodes. It's a fantastic result. And I know the feedback that I get talking to people out and about at industry events that listen in certainly get a huge amount of value from these. So it is great to get that feedback, and it's great to celebrate, what has been now 50 fabulous episodes.
Yes, and I think a really important part of why those podcast episodes have been valuable is all the amazing speakers we've had on throughout that whole time. We've had a lot of people bring some really valuable insights and knowledge to the show. So we'd also like to thank our speakers as well for all their help throughout all those episodes. Yeah,
and it's one of those ones where we've kind of toyed a little bit with the format, but ultimately, as many of you listening will understand, we sort of take the first part of the show to really touch on what is shaping the sector at that point in time. We're fortunate that we seem to work within an industry where news is fairly regular. That keeps us busy in terms of the show itself. But as you said, Miranda, the other piece, the second part of the episode, we've really now been fortunate to focus on a topic and bring in expertise across, industry peers. So fantastic people with great levels of knowledge in different skill sets within the SMSF sector. So accountants, lawyers, financial advisors. We've even had regulators, professional bodies represented. And it's their preparedness, I guess, to come on and share their views, which really drive our audience to continue to listen to the SMSF Adviser Show. And I know we've used the show as well to sort of announce and get clarification from the regulator as well. So it's these sort of things that really demonstrate the value that the show actually provides to the SMSF professional community.
Yeah. So I think now we might jump into having a bit of a look at what happened during 2022 and what really were the important developments or changes for SMSF professionals working in this space.
Yeah, so maybe, Miranda, let's start with some of the top stories because, there are a number of technical changes that happened throughout the year. So, from your point of view, what really drove traffic from the key stories that we saw, in particular around, legislative reform or announcements that had been made?
Yeah, so just to start off with the very top story for this year, it was the work test changes and those changes around contributions, which were passed through Parliament through around the middle of this year. And you could definitely see, just looking from some of our biggest podcast listens and news stories as well, that advisors have been really interested in how they can use those changes to bring better strategies for their clients and, open up new opportunities.
Yeah, so we saw the government, as you said, finalise that in the first half of the year, and it gave us some clear space to obviously start to look at the strategies and ideas that would be employed from the 1st of July 2022 with that removal of the work test for individuals, in essence, to make voluntary contributions from 65 up to 75 years of age. And let's not forget the 28 days after they turned 75 as
Yes.
well. So all those little anomalies, right? But it did open up all the strategic opportunities. And as you rightly said, we had some great feedback. Not only we ran a podcast around that particular topic, we also, as you said, saw the traffic there and the strategies that really came out of it. Doesn't surprise me at all that that was the top story for the year.
Yes. And moving on to the second one, actually something that got released very recently, just last week, we have the ASIC, the new ASIC SMSF guidance. So they've updated their guidance for advisors on sort of how to navigate the whole suitability of SMSFs for particular clients. So previously we had those 2 information sheets. They've now been withdrawn and replaced with this new information sheet. And they've obviously removed that $500,000 threshold and a few things along those lines. So I think in a way it's kind of shifted a little bit more to professional judgment rather than looking for those very specific figures and things along those lines.
Yeah, so all I can say is hallelujah. So it's something that should have been done before this, in my view. We've seen the SMSF Association spend a significant amount of time, got Rice Warner involved, obviously, through some of the research that they undertook around pricing points, cost competitiveness, because in many instances, using data, antiquated data, to formulate the position that they did stymie opportunities for advisors to look towards offering self-managed super funds. We saw licensees hang their hat on things like thresholds and costs and so forth, which were totally out of kilter with the reality of how it works. And as I said, the SMSF Association did a lot of work there, got real data from within the industry to be able to support and recognise that. And by and large, as we know, cost is but one factor into the decision-making process. So it's a positive step. So I think, yes, that's great that that has been removed. It'll be interesting to see how licensees respond to that issue now. So are they going to still have some notional minimum values that they'll impose on advisors themselves? Will they refer to potentially the advice that the SMSF Association provided? That to me is going to be the next interesting piece in this, because like I said, ASIC's now saying it's not part of our remit to say whether there is an appropriate threshold. It is now left to you. And I think you made the reference before, Miranda, around some level of professional judgment. So is that going to be left to the professional themselves? Or, like I said, from an advice point of view, is the licensee still going to impose some other oversight to that process as well?
Yeah, it will be interesting to see if they put their own sort of restrictions and things sort of overlaying that. So, yes, it will be interesting to see. Another sort of big thing this year has been court cases. And actually, the biggest story was actually the Benz case, which you might recall was to do with notional estates, which is really a New South Wales issue. But it was quite a significant death benefit with that case, which I think is part of the reason why it drew so much interest.
Yeah, and I think talking to that whole case law area, so yes, as you said, Ben's was very specific to New South Wales. The other one, of course, was around the High Court decision. So that we finally saw a Commonwealth law application to what had been various states looking at the operation of the payment of superannuation death benefits and how and whether SIS regulation 6.17a actually applied to SMSFs or not. So getting that level of clarity has certainly seen a lot of topic and conversation going on around death benefits, around whether deeds need to be looked at to deal with those particular issues. So, yeah, I foresee as we move forward, these certainly the Hill and Zuda decision gives us a lot of clarity, but I think we're going to continue to see case law be very prevalent as we move into 2023 as well.
Yes, I'm sure that seems to be the constant thing that happens every year.
Yep.
So moving on to some of the other sort of big items, there was also a lot of, I guess, ASIC action to do with particularly auditors. So we saw quite a lot of action sort of stemming from ATO referrals to ASIC and then ASIC imposing either restrictions or deregistering auditors, and that made a couple of the top stories as well.
Yeah, and we're seeing the regulators take a much firmer stance now post this sort of pandemic period, whereby not only where there were issues being raised through those deregistrations around independence and quality of files and so forth, but we're also seeing that reflected through the increased number of trustees being disqualified that I know we've spoken about over the last little bit of time. So there is still a very continued push within the industry to increase standards, and that those standards not only apply to professionals ordinarily, but the standards that are being expected of trustees as well if they're going to be running their own self-managed super funds.
Yes. And we've also seen quite a few other big developments this year. So obviously there was the Quality of Advice Review, which we had the terms of reference released in March, and now the final report's been finalised as far as we know, and Minister Stephen Jones is currently looking at that, but it's likely we won't really see any response till at least January at this stage based on what he's said.
Yeah, so again, that's played a fairly substantial role around financial advice for this year, and of course, in addition to the terms of reference, we saw an issues paper release sort of mid-year as well, and in many instances, we saw very interesting views across the whole sector, consumer groups through to advice groups, conversations about whether financial institutions might be re-entering the sector, what role digital advice is going to play, whether accountants are going to have any relationship or role in that. These are all things, obviously, now that we wait and see what comes out of that final report, and then, of course, what the government may do in response to that as well. So, I suspect whilst the Quality of Advice Review took up a lot of time throughout 2022 in bringing that together, it's going to arguably have an even bigger role to play as we move into 2023.
Yes, it'll be interesting to see where it all lands once it's gone through the government as well.
And one of our biggest podcasts, Miranda, was, of course, during the year, we spoke about the major issues for SMSF professionals. So we did one of the few where we actually did a panel discussion with Brian Ashenden from BT, Tracy Scotchbrook from the SMSF Association, Bronnie Speed from Chartered Accountants Australia, New Zealand, and Michael Davison from CPA Australia. And it gave some really fascinating insights into the ongoing dialogue and discussion about the impact of different parts of the profession and where that might land through that Quality of Advice Review process.
Yes, that was definitely one of the most popular ones this year, and it was really interesting to hear from the different sides of the industry, whether that's advice or accounting, or we also had the SMSF Association as well. So I think that did give some valuable insights, that one.
The other one here is we didn't have one budget this year. We actually had two, didn't we?
Yes. Yes, that was interesting. Although despite there being two, there actually wasn't that many changes that got released. It was more, sort of confirming things from the previous government, whether they were going to go ahead or ruling things out, which was still good in a way, but yes, very quiet in terms of budgets this year, but might not be the case next year. We'll wait and see.
Yeah, absolutely. And we still do have a couple of those unknown variables for SMSFs. We saw Labor give some commitment towards the residency rule changes. To what extent, we're not sure, but we still have that lingering unknown of, are they going to provide that 2-year amnesty for defined benefit, legacy pensions, defined benefit income streams and market-linked pensions? Yeah, again, we'll need to wait and see. But yes, it was a fairly quiet night on both fronts, both in March and also in October.
Yes. Although once they've developed this objective for super, we might see quite a lot of movement once that gets bedded down.
Yeah, and that'll really form part of, I guess, the mandate of the government next year. We're already seeing Minister Stephen Jones sort of talk to the fact that changes will be afoot. And as you said, after they kind of settle on that framework for the objective of super, things such as adequacy and so forth will play a pretty big role in reshaping of the superannuation laws. And as you said, the next federal budget might be a very different night in the context of superannuation and SMSFs as to what we've seen in more recent years.
Yes. One of the other changes that happened recently was the downsizer contributions, which has also gotten a fair bit of interest. So we saw, even though it had already kind of dropped from mid this year, it's been dropped again down to 55, which obviously sort of raises issues around whether it's actually going to be appropriate for the client, or they should hold off, do it at a later point, given it is a once-only contribution that you can make.
Yeah, so we have just seen royal assent be provided in respect to the bill that enables the qualifying age to move from 60 to 65. So within a very short space of time, we've seen a 10-year reduction in that use of the downsizer contribution strategy. But I think, as you rightly said, Miranda, and one of the key considerations here is going to be the potential to use it again in the future. And I reference it regularly as this kind of last resort contribution. So do you want to be using it at 55 when it's not subject to age limits? It's not subject to total superannuation balance. So therefore, is it right to do it at this point in time, or is it maybe more beneficial to, if you're going to make that contribution, to do it as a non-concessional at that point? But these are all, I guess, parts of the story that is this year, and views that have been expressed around the timing and making of these contributions where they qualify to be downsizers. Yes.
And I think it would be remiss not to mention SuperStream, even though it actually did come in late 2021. It obviously has created a few headaches and issues throughout this year. Hopefully those do finally sort of get resolved next year. But yes, it certainly has been one of the bigger sort of challenges, and actually one of the top strategy pieces this year, which was sent in from Shelley Benton from ASF Audits, was actually a piece about SuperStream and navigating that.
I think you made comment there that it created some issues. I think that's an understatement. So it's been fairly significant. And I think in the context of this year, yes, you rightly said it. I guess it did start in October of the previous year, but from July this year was the first year that we've had the standard in Division 6.5 actually tested from a compliance audit point of view. So auditors are now having to play a role in that process. And we did also see the ATO provide some guidance in respect to what their expectations are to ensure that trustees have complied with their obligations in rolling money in or rolling money out using that SuperStream requirement. And of course, during the year, because there were so many issues and obtaining ESAs and whether they had ESAs or not, we also saw the ATO provide some temporary relief to help work through those situations as well. So yes, it's been a whole mixed bag in terms of what SuperStream is. And as you rightly said, let's hope with ongoing dialogue that's happening between the SMSF industry, the ATO and APRA and so forth, that we can come back with a far better framework moving forward. And when we're talking about it in 12 months' time, we're talking about it in a much better light.
Yes, and arguably the other big headache area, I think you could say, is probably director IDs. And yes, we've just coming up to the extended deadline of that now. So hopefully the numbers are a bit closer now. But yeah, there's certainly been lots of confusion and areas of uncertainty with that, and just issues getting clients with the online process. I mean, not all clients have things set up online. So yeah, that's definitely been a challenge as well, I would say. Yeah,
debacle would probably be another word that might be relevant to insert at that point in time. But, I guess what we've seen with this process, the challenge has been the transitional period, hasn't it? So we've had from the introduction of the measures last year through to the 30th of November to get it right. We had a huge number of individuals that still hadn't done it by that stage. So the commissioner, in essence, was not going to apply compliance resources for another 2 weeks, which, as you said, is pretty much closing now. We saw the government only start to spend some money on a marketing campaign to make people aware of it 5 weeks before it was due, given that we had a 1 year, more than 1 year. We had 13 months as a transitional period. And then right at the very end of this transitional period, we see the the registrar provide a legislative instrument that in essence removes a number of individuals because they have resigned from their role as a director, and that wasn't the policy intent of the law. So therefore, you don't need to get it. And I know, having spoken to a number of people, and when that all came out, that stuff blew up as well, because people were saying, so now you tell me you went through all that pain and process. Clients had to go through that pain and process, and they didn't even need it in the first place. So from a communication point of view, I think there's a lot of lessons that can be learned from it. We understand the reason and rationale as to why, but the process has been far from successful.
Yes, it's not been easy, but anyway.
Yeah.
So the other thing that I think is worth mentioning is also some of the changes around electronic signing of deeds. Obviously, we've seen that sort of first tranche go through Parliament, but now there's the second part of that, which still hasn't quite been passed, but the bill is currently before Parliament. So it'll be interesting. I'm sure that will be quite helpful once it does get passed through.
Yeah, so this has been an ongoing piece, of course, throughout COVID the last few years, where we had temporary measures. Those measures then became permanent earlier this year. And now, as part of the government's Modernising Business Communications Plan, we're seeing other parts of the Corporations Act, or all parts of the Corporations Act, to be honest. And then hopefully, as we move into 2023, other Treasury laws move into a technology neutrality area. So meaning that not only can things be signed electronically, they can be signed in wet ink, they would be able to be stored electronically, or they could be stored in a physical sense as well. So these will all be positive steps. Of course, it's going to need to look at not only what the law says, but then what any potential restrictions might say in deeds or other documents as well. So yeah, it's really important, obviously, just to keep moving pace with this and understanding some of the practical and technical challenges that exist in the current environment, because of the fact that, the Electronic Transactions Act has limitations in the current law, and therefore we need to comply and manage those risks with our clients and then internally within our business as well.
And in terms of the other sort of thing that's still ongoing, or that's going to be happening next year really, is the move with the T-bar framework to quarterly. So that means all SMSFs will now need to report any events that happen on a quarterly basis.
Yeah, so this, we were fortunate to have the ATO come on, Delilia, I think it was, from memory, and we spoke to her about, and we needed to get some clarification on issues. So this was one of the great things about this show, is that we can not only engage with the regulator, but it allowed us to get clarification, because there was this transitional move to annual reporting, but the 1 July date became a hard date. So what it enables us to do was to seek that clarification, and we had confirmed that, in essence, all events that occur from 1 July 2022 all the way through to the 30th of September 2023 have a due date of the 28th of October 2023. So there was that lack of clarity around these questions on the ATO's website. So again, this is a great forum for us to approach the regulator, and they've been fantastic in supporting us. We've had a number of their representatives come on, and when we need to get this clarity, being able to do so has certainly been not only a value of us personally, but obviously to the broader SMSF community as well.
Yes, I also think it was very valuable when we had Kelly on for one of our much earlier episodes, who obviously gave a lot of clarity when the auditor independence changes were happening. So yeah, it's definitely been good being able to get that clarity.
Yeah, and I think the same, again, from the SMSF Association's point of view as well. I know we've had a number of different CEO, and Peter Burgess, the soon-to-be incoming CEO, and Tracy in policy and board members, obviously, but just having representation of the industry, and then the discussions that happen behind the scenes, I guess, with Treasury and ASIC and others. So again, sharing some really important insights into things that are shaping the sector, and the views to try and get decisions and outcomes that will benefit not only the members themselves, but obviously all stakeholders within the industry.
Yes. So Aaron, were there any other big technical issues for you that you saw through 2022 that you think were quite significant?
No, other than I think from what we've covered, obviously that's a fairly good representation. Of course, we did see the ATO come out and recognise that all the COVID relief that we'd seen over the past few years did cease at the 1st of July 2022. So that was important, in particular in the context of the in-house asset relief, residency relief, and those sorts of things. Of course, we still may have circumstances where the mandatory code of conduct would be relevant in respect to different arrangements around rent relief that was provided. The other thing, I think, was just the response recently from the Council of Financial Regulators with leveraging super. The outcome was, I guess, a 3-year follow-up, still saying that they don't see any systemic risks in the industry, but there is, I guess they refer to individual risk and some still concerns around that, even though since the last review, there'd been a fairly substantial change in advice in, I guess, big banks leaving and a number of those sorts of things, legislative change. So it would be interesting as we move into 2023 as well, whether the Labor government might look to act on some of that report as well. So they're probably the other two things that I see off the back of that from a technical point of view. And I guess to you, Miranda, just to kind of wrap up from the data that we've got, not only from the podcast, but the strategy pieces and articles, what were some of the other things there from our audience to let them know what shaped 2022?
Yeah, well, some of the other things that might be worth mentioning is there was another strategy piece that had a lot of reads, which was to do with comparable sales. So that's obviously around all those valuation issues. So obviously that's still a little bit of a challenge, I think, at times for SMSFs, particularly with more obscure kind of properties where there isn't a lot of evidence to sort of put a valuation together. And succession planning's also still a popular topic, particularly in terms of our strategy pieces. So people are still looking for more guidance. I think SMSF, the whole SMSF area is quite a tricky area to navigate in terms of planning, whether it's binding death benefit nominations or reversionary pensions and all the little considerations that go with that. And the other podcast that did really well was actually the one we did on super splitting in terms of divorce or separation and how to navigate that whole process. So I think they're some of the other big issues that got a lot of interest as well. And
that'll make David Basoli very pleased that he rated very highly. So well done, David, to you if you're listening. So I think wrapping up, as you can understand, there was plenty that had gone on in this year. And as we've typically done on the SMSF Adviser Show, it was to share, obviously, what has been shaping the year, and that'll kind of give you a bit of an insight as to what's going to be ahead, and we'll talk to that as a topic in the new year. I guess from my point of view, in respect to our first 50 episodes, I think first to you, my co-host Miranda, thank you. I know you rejoined, or you joined after coming back to work after having a child. So I think I've had 3 or 4 co-hosts along the way. So
yes,
I think you're the longest now. You'll be the longest serving. But it is great, obviously, to do this with you. We kind of share the load in terms of the way it works. I hope the feedback continues to be such that our audience enjoys that, I guess, interplay between helping understand what's making news, you finding the news, most importantly, and then me giving some context around it from a technical perspective. So to you, a very special thank you for your contribution to the SMSF Adviser Show.
Yes, well, I was going to say also, I think that's the other thing that sets it apart is having your technical expertise and the fact that you are on the ground and seeing everything that's going on and you've got that technical knowledge. So we're always very grateful for that and everything that you bring to the podcast. So thank you as well.
Excellent. Thank you. To our guests, a very special thank you. We've probably had 35 or 40 guests along the way. It is fairly important that we get some different contexts, as we said, from different fields of expertise. We are quite blessed insofar that our industry is represented in various fields, as I said before, from accountants and advisors, solicitors, actuaries, auditors, investments. We've even our most recent one where we spoke about cryptocurrencies and the like. So a very special thank you to each and every person that has been a part of the show, and some on multiple occasions. And we'll continue to come to you and hope that you can reciprocate back in that support. And then to our audience, I think most importantly as well, for listening and the continued support. It doesn't happen without that fantastic support. And it's great when I'm out and about and people kind of come to you and they say, oh, I listened to that episode last week and it was great to hear this and hear that. And that's, to me, that's the greatest type of feedback, because you know everything that you're doing is actually worthwhile. So to everyone there, a special thank you as well.
Yes. So thank you to everyone again. And we hope you continue listening in 2023. And of course, if there are any topics or speakers that you want to get in touch about, you can send those through to editor@smsfadvisoronline.com.au.
Excellent. Well, thank you once again for not only joining us for this episode, but for joining us for our last 50 and all throughout 2022. We look forward to you joining us for our next episode. Have a great Christmas. Take care and bye for now.